Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. In our continuing series on Rob Cosman Furniture, I'm going to show you a jewelry cabinet that I made for my wife a few years ago. There was a lot of changes that we made along the way that I think improved the overall look. I'm going to show you all about it. I'm going to tell you how I made it. Stay with us. I'm Rob Cosman, and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new and you haven't subscribed, please do so. Hit the notification bell so you'll receive alerts when we release a new video. And anytime we use a special tool, we'll always leave a description down below. All right, let's get to work. So this is Kim's jewelry cabinet. And I got this idea in early October. We've been married for 36 years, so over that period of time, you tend to accumulate a lot of stuff. And with 10 children, someone was always giving her a piece of jewelry. So I had some things that I had to work around, particularly on these drawers. I don't think there's anything worse than opening up a drawer and having to rifle through a handful of stuff to try to find what you want. So tried to get very unique with the way each piece of jewelry was held. Same inside. As I mentioned, we used wood hinges on this. Used bird's eye maple and walnut. And if you note, we did things that enabled us to make each drawer front look identical. If you follow the grain pattern, you'll see it's almost identical on every drawer front. Same thing on the door panels. We did a little bit of metal work. I'll share that with you as well. And the overall design, like I said, evolved. First thing I want to do is cover the finish, the wood, and the dimensions. First, the wood. I'm going to go through and actually open this up because I can't remember it all. The outside case is black walnut. The doorknobs, I turned all those on the lathe. They're black walnut as well. The panels are bird's eye maple. Now this is bird's eye veneer over top of Baltic birch plywood to make it as stable as possible. If you open up in here, we used leather, black leather on the interior. I used gaboon ebony on these pieces. These are bird's eye maple as well, these little knobs. The inside, the drawer sides are black walnut. We use leather on the inside of actually all of the drawers. Oh, some of the pieces, the little boxes inside were made out of yellow cedar, one of my favorite woods. And this one's the same way. So 1, 2, 3, 4 different species of wood. It has an oil finish. Boy, that was a real pain. The reason is avoid getting oil on the leather. That was a difficult process. It's a lovely finish if you get enough coats on there to build up and get some protection, but it was difficult to apply. And if I did it again, I think I might have gone with a sprayed lacquer finish, but it's done now. Now the final part is the dimensions. So the cabinet itself is 20 inches tall. It is 12.5 inches wide. And with the exception of the back, it's 5 inches deep. You add the back on and it's 5 5/8 of an inch. And the back actually protrudes 1/4 of an inch all the way around. So you can add, the actual room it's going to take up is going to be 20.5 by just shy of 13. That's the dimensions. Before I get into the joinery, I want to talk to you about the overall design. I like to build boxes. So this started off as just a big box. First of all, they had to fill a need, and the need was my wife had a lot of chains, hanging things that they go around their neck. Had to have a place for that. Also had a lot of rings, earrings and whatever. Combine that with the fact that I love to build drawers. I also love my wood hinge. So kind of put that together in the concept of how we were going to do it. I like balance. Now, from there, what do you do? Well, the drawers down through the middle, there's 8 of them, and I had some bird's eye veneer, so I was able to add the detail of every drawer front looks the same as the one above it and below it because the veneer came out of a flitz. That means one piece of wood that's cut multiple times, very thin slices that you glue on, and that's why you get that look. Same thing on both sides. At first, it was just going to be a box on the wall, but it just didn't seem right. So I ended up putting this frame all the way around. And that just kind of elevated it a little bit, held it off from the wall, and gave it, literally framed it in. Made it look a little bit better. Joinery was a big feature, but as I open this up, I'll show you some of the other things that we did. So as I mentioned, the chains were very problematic to store, because if you put them in back, then you've got to move all the ones in the front to get rid of them, or to get at it. So what I decided to do was, on the lathe, with a piece of bird's eye, I turned this spool of sorts that would allow you to take this out and then access whichever one you want. I had to use a piece of ebony in there in order for it to be strong enough, because the components were extremely thin. So I didn't have a lot of material in the back in order to secure this brass rod. So this is actually a piece of gaboon ebony. And you've got two of these, one on either side. So when you're done, and it's flared in the back, so you're not fumbling around trying to find the opening. Plus, I narrowed this down and polished the end, so it's pretty easy to find where it goes. Of course, this one works the same way. Now, also wanted to set things off against, I didn't want the wood background and for whatever reason, so this is all leather. I used a lot of black leather in various places. So the back wall and this back side is leather, which also gave me the opportunity to put this little piece of walnut right here that functions to stop the leather, but also it is what the door closes against. And as I mentioned, I like balance and symmetry, and she had a lot of chains, so we have one on both sides. And if you open the doors all the way up, you'll also see that we put, she has lots of bracelets too that are just small chains, and that's what hangs on these. Now the other problem we ran into, of course this is leather as well, is it didn't have much material to put these into. This panel is 1/8" Baltic birch veneered with bird's eye and veneered with leather on the inside. So if you try to drill a hole into 1/8" Baltic birch to put this, looks like a knob, but it's a knob for hanging bracelets. There's not enough material there. So what I did is I cut a piece of gaboon ebony, very strong wood, and that gave me plenty to drill in order to put a little spigot that I turned on the end of these into a matching hole. But then how do I fasten them? Well, what I did over here, I actually dovetailed these little pieces of ebony into a piece of walnut, then cut the walnut back, cut a little bevel on the end, and that allowed me some long grain to long grain glue surface. So I was able to glue this piece into the side on both sides, and that's sufficient to hold it, because there really was nothing to fasten it into here, and you certainly couldn't go through from this side to fasten it. Okay, we'll leave that side, and we'll go to the back real quick. Had to be able to fasten it to the wall, and I didn't want any ugly fasteners showing. So this is called a French cleat. So this is a piece of white oak. You fasten your piece of white oak to the wall, level it up, and then this 30-degree bevel is matched by the opposite 30-degree bevel inside here. So you simply put this in the wall, put your cabinet against it, and it holds it firmly, all the gravity obviously keeping in place, and then one screw that is accessed from the bottom drawer goes in here to prevent that from getting knocked off and to hold it securely to the wall. What else can we talk about here? Also wanted, and I think this is important, that you add depth by having your drawers stop inside of the framework instead of being out here flush, which is very difficult to do because then everything has to line up perfectly. But by having that stop just inside, you can be off a little bit one side to the other. It does not show, but it also gives depth to it. And then what we did here, we matched over here as well. And this was almost complete. This was one great big panel, and it just didn't look right, this great big open panel. So I went back in and I added these pieces. Of course, this was already finished, so I had to go in and I had to scrape the veneer down to the bare wood so I have some good glue surface, but we added these to break that up. And the placement of the knobs were, as I mentioned, were all turned on the lathe, and wanted to line those up and match them up as good as possible. So end up turning probably 5 or 6 more than I needed, so I could go back in and try to get them so that they were as close to being identical as possible. And that just seemed to be right, to keep that right down through the midline. So when it came to making the drawers, had to get creative. Nothing was off the shelf. So what I did here is I took a piece of leather. I took some 3/4 inch round foam that's used for weather stripping, and I wrapped the leather around it, and then I put a brass rod down in there. If I pull it back, you might be able to see it. And that piece of brass rod was just enough to hold that leather down, and it creates a little spot where you can put your ring in, and it'll securely hold your ring. The leather is a nice material that wears extremely well, and it just makes a nice presentation. Drawers are walnut on the sides. Again, you want to try to make your dovetail show off if you're going to put all that time and effort into it. Show you a few of the other ones that we had here. This was just a big open one. You have to have some open ones. Always nice to have leather on the bottom, because it does such a nice, has a nice effect on the sound. If it's a bare wood, it's almost echoey and loud. The leather just, I don't know, sets it off. This one we just had 2 little pieces that we added to the side, allowed us to dovetail a little tray, and that little tray is free to move side to side. Another open one. That one is open as well. This one for bangles, I think they're called, and use that same design so that you could take that off and have some more stored underneath. Problem you always run counter when you have a deep drawer like that is if you put a lot of material in there, or things in there, then you've got to take everything out in order to find it. So this just allowed you to have a second level without the hassle. And this one was just a way of separating. These are just placed in there. There's just a simple little lap joint. And the one on the top is very similar, except we added another tray. This one comes out. You've got a little bigger spacing on the bottom. That sits in there. And again, an easy way to have lots of, well, this is for earrings in particular. You have lots of different spaces and just makes it easy to access them. So when we did this, in the idea of having this drawer, this door, I wanted to have the continuity on the side. So I don't know if you can tell, but this is the same piece of wood. I simply cut it out and made sure that I kept everything in line. This one is pretty easy to tell. This one on this side is actually, I'll spin this around. You can really tell on this side that it's the same piece of wood as you see the cathedrals and the walnut going from the bottom to the top. The drawers, the drawer sides, or pardon me, the dividers are actually sitting in dados. So if you can kind of see this, you've got all of those dividers, solid wood dividers front to back, and they're sitting in a shallow dado. Of course, you stop it so that you don't see it come through. It just shows up as a butt joint right here. And then I just screwed it to reinforce it because I knew this was going to be hidden behind leather, so that wasn't an issue. I cut a little chamfer everywhere. So instead of radiusing the edges, there's a chamfer that follows through on all the pieces, including here. So when you're having to do something on the inside, you're just using your chisel to cut into this piece on a bit of an angle as you follow this little chamfer, and then trim it up the same way so it just ends up hopefully looking right. And that's the story on the actual joints. Now I'm talking a little bit about what we did with the drawers to make them unique. So when you have this many drawers, if you're not careful, and if you aren't particularly careful in selecting the drawer front, it just looks like a real hodgepodge. So what I did, I actually cut through dovetails. I used a piece of maple, but you can see if you look real closely, there's a joint line right there. So I have glued on a piece of veneer onto the front of this to make it a half blind. It's a faster way of cutting a half blind, but in this case I didn't do it because of speed. I did it because I wanted to use the same piece of veneer on all of the drawer fronts so that you would have that continuity of the grain running top to bottom. And the other thing I did here that was a little bit different is I made somewhat of a jig for doing this. I took a piece of material that was the same size as this drawer side. I cut the dovetails, but I didn't remove the waste. And I would simply clamp that on the back side of this piece, and I would allow my saw to run through those existing kerfs on the wider piece, and that would allow me to go in and make all of these cuts without having to go through the layout, and it really sped the process up substantially. And this is a traditional drawer, except for the fact that we use a piece of Baltic birch on the bottom that we had already glued. And this is something you want, if you're going to do something like this, you don't want to try to add a piece of leather after the fact, because you never get it to fit perfectly in there. Instead, you add the leather to the piece of, in this case, birch plywood on the bottom, and then account for it so that your groove is wide enough that you can slide it in. But it makes it much neater when it's actually tucked in all the way around, no gaps. The doors were pretty standard, except for the fact that they're on an angle like that, which makes it a little more difficult. Spacing of your dovetail, you have to make sure you take into account the fact that you're going to cut through your half pin, which doesn't leave you a whole lot on this side. So that was a little bit on the difficult scale. And one last little thing I want to show you. If you're going to do this, it's always nice to do things with a certain level of precision. So when you take that little tray and set it down, it just eventually finds its spot, as what air's in there has to escape in order to allow it to drop. Hi, if you like my work, if you like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. And I've always said, better tools make it a whole lot easier. If you click on the icon with the plane and the chisel, it'll take you to our website, introduce you to all of our tools, and also talk to you about our online and in-person workshops. Good luck in your woodwork.